Thank you so much, Francis. So, at the very beginning of this very interesting conference, an ethical concept came up, the common good, which is the good of each and every individual. But there's at least another ethical concept we need to work with, and that's the concept of rights. And what rights says is that whatever the common good is, there are certain limits to what can be imposed upon individuals, what sacrifices they can make, even in the name of the common good. And that's because simply in virtue of our humanity, our character as human beings, we have certain moral rights. So one way to think about this is there's an obvious sense in which it's better if there's only one person being tortured versus 3 people being tortured. But it doesn't follow from that I would be justified in torturing one person to prevent 3 other people from being tortured. So rights operate as a kind of constraint on some conception of the common good that would allow those sacrifices. And they represent a kind of humanist morality in the sense that it's saying there's something intrinsically valuable about the human condition, and these rights are entitlements that flow from that. And as also mentioned, the human condition, and that we also have the desire to be Greek gods. I'm Greek, I'm not a god, but what I do know about the Greek gods is they weren't notably moral people or beings. And part of the reason for that is morality is tailored to our nature. If you take away things like various forms of vulnerability and so forth, then certain moral norms aren't obviously in play. And so what you get with the Greek gods is a kind of gangsterism. So part of the thought here is any attempt to transcend the human condition also risks cutting away at the basic understanding of morality that we've taken for granted. So it's a kind of leap in the dark. Now, one of the questions that the development of new technologies is raising is whether the existing human rights framework, as we find it, for example, initially elaborated in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, is fit for purpose, or whether it needs to be, in some sense, modified. So we could think of 3 kinds of modifications that might be necessary. One is that we reinterpret existing rights. So we say, in a world where AI can perform most functions, we can't anymore talk about a right to work, but maybe we should talk about a right to universal basic income. Another possibility is we talk about new rights holders. Perhaps there'll be highly sophisticated forms of artificial general intelligence that mean that robots have rights. Or maybe more prosaically, we want to say that in this new world of digital technology, there'll be new duty bearers, and in particular, maybe corporations will have to take on some human rights responsibilities, some governance responsibilities that were formerly only limited to governments. But the third possibility, the third kind of change I'm going to talk about, is the possibility that we need novel rights. So maybe we need a right to access the internet. Maybe we need a right to access reality against those philosophers like David Chalmers who say living in virtual reality is just as good as living in the reality we currently inhabit. The right that I want to think about in the remaining minutes is the right to a human decision. And I think we should be careful. We shouldn't assume just so easily that because we're talking about a radically new technology, therefore there isn't an existing regulatory framework that applies to it, and that we have to begin de novo, as it were, with new regulations. I think we need to explore to what extent existing human rights already provide an answer to many of the challenges and problems thrown up by new technology, but that doesn't rule out the possibility that we may have to make certain kinds of additions. And we've already seen, for example, in Article 22 of the GDPR, or in the AI Bill of Rights that was produced last year by the White House, reference to something like a right to a human decision or a right to opt out of being subject to an automated decision. So there are different ways we can think about what that right might provide. One might be, I have a right to appeal to a human against a decision made by an automated system. Another possibility is, I have a right to opt out of an automated decision-making process. But I want to think about a more stringent requirement, which is, I have a right that a decision should not be taken by an automated system. Now, there are many reasons, perhaps, not to use automated systems for various functions. There's a great book by Joseph Weizenbaum, the guy that invented the chatbot Eliza, called Computer, Power, and Human Reason. And he said we shouldn't waste time thinking about what capabilities AI will have or currently has. We should think about the more fundamental question, what AI should be allowed to do. That's a broader question. Someone who decided to run their love life based on what an app told them to do would be making all sorts of mistakes and maybe treating his relationships in a highly superficial way. They wouldn't necessarily be violating anyone's rights. So I'm thinking about this narrower thing when AI decision-making is excluded because there is a right to it. And it's not straightforward that that's the case. But think about the situation where someone says, your court case will be determined by an AI judge, and their determination will not simply assist a human in making a decision, their determination will be binding on you. What's problematic about that? Now, before we go into what's problematic, I think it's important to look at what might be beneficial about it, right? So one touted advantage that has been put forward is, unlike humans, the AI system would be consistent across the board. Asylum applications in the US, and that's a highly important decision that affects people's lives gravely, some judges, on one end of the spectrum, allow 5% of those applications, and other judges 88%. So basically, whether you get asylum depends on the lottery on which judge you get. An automated system would presumably not show that variability. An automated system would be more efficient, less expensive potentially, doesn't have to sleep, doesn't have to be paid a high salary, and it would cure the backlog that we currently have in many legal systems, getting on to, 30 million backlog cases in India, 80 million in Brazil. Hence, the OECD says 46% of people in the world don't actually live under the rule of law. And the third possibility is that the system, the automated system, might be better at arriving at the correct decision, right? This isn't the case now, but it could be in the future. So what is it that may hold us back from embracing this possibility and say that in certain domains at least, not every domain, but in certain domains, there's a right to a human decision? And I think we see the resistance to this is coming not so much at the level of output. Will the system produce a decision that is acceptable? Perhaps it will, but at the level of process. So this is one of the ways in which AI is forcing us to rethink our moral values and the priority that we assign to them. So one consideration is, can the AI system justify the decision in a way that is appropriate? So take an automated system called Lex Machina. This is a system that is able to predict the outcome of US patent litigation at the level of the most expert patent lawyer, okay? So you might think, well, if it can predict the decision, why not use it to make the decision? But it predicts the decision on the basis not of the law, but of the name of the judge, the name of the lawyers in the case, the value of the case, the law firms involved. It's making connections amongst a vast array of data. But these are not justifying considerations for the decision, even if the decision, as it were, taken by itself, is correct. Second sort of consideration I think that's relevant is we want someone not only to take a decision, but to be responsible for the decision that they have taken. And a human being who decides to be a judge, who makes a commitment to apply the law and makes a commitment to apply it in a particular case, that taking of responsibility isn't manifested by any automated system that we're aware of. Now, you might say, yes, but there's a background taking of responsibility, our decision to deploy the system. But that background taking of responsibility is quite different from the human judge's direct taking of responsibility for the decision in your case. And the final consideration I think is relevant is an idea of solidarity, the idea that one human being interacts with another on the basis of rational considerations. I, the litigant in the case, the judge, both autonomous, rational beings, both trying to figure out what the law requires in our particular case. It's a bit like the way we value trial by jury, not necessarily because the jury will produce a better outcome than a panel of experts, but because we value the solidarity that comes by this joint endeavor of figuring out what the right thing is in our particular case. My time is up. Thank you very much.
Well done.